Thank you for joining XROM, which is India's first AR/VR focused podcast. And today, I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. James George, who's an Emmy-winning artist and entrepreneur. He's the one who coined the term volumetric, and he's co-directed the first volumetric film Clouds and co-created the original volumetric capture tool Depthkit. He's the CEO and co-founder of Scatter, a creative company dedicated to defining the emerging tech language of volumetric filmmaking. So, James, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. uh, Storytelling has evolved over the years, right from your black and white to your color, Technicolor, IMAX, 2D, 3D, AR, VR, MR, immersive, interactive, virtual production. And now we're going to the language of volumetric, and there's obviously AI, generative AI. So I want to talk about that. But maybe if you could just address to the evolving nature of storytelling.
Eddie, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be on your podcast. And this is such a great way to kick off the conversation because it's really the reason why we do what we do at Scatter and what has motivated me really from the beginning of my creative journey or entrepreneurial journey, professional journey, however you want to define it. So I think even into the early days of my career, I noticed a trend. I grew up watching sci-fi movies. I grew up playing video games. I grew up, making DIY skateboarding videos, and all of those things I saw, and of course, publishing and consuming all of this on the internet. And a real trend became apparent to me, which you're hinting at, which is this constant evolution of the way that humans communicate and tell stories, especially visually, which is where I'm very interested in. And that it's not fixed. It's something that is continually in flux. And especially for our generation or generations in this current age, it's really driven by new technologies. And that's where I wanted to be involved. It's where I wanted to put my life's work into. And in particular, a few of these technologies I saw as converging. Specifically, I saw that the visual effects industry and how movies were made were becoming much more computer generated. We went, and my generation really saw the jump from film to digital. We saw the jump from traditional practical effects to visual effects done in 3D animation tools and the like. And at the same token, we saw the emergence of the video game industry start to really fulfill the needs of the audiences and consumers with that storytelling power that we get from cinema, the way to vicariously live through other people as we do when we watch movies. But the unique aspect of video games was that those stories were interactive, that we were embodying the role of the protagonist, we were taking action, and that there was this level of participation that wasn't that was more active than what was in cinema, which is more of a vicarious experience. So the convergence of those two things from a modality of the viewer was something that I was seeing. There was the line between film and video games were becoming quite blurry. In addition, the advancement in computer graphics were also causing video games to go from being little sprites like Mario worlds into fully rendered, lush 3D worlds like you initially saw with a game like Myst. It felt amazing at the time, these 3D worlds that looked photorealistic. And now, of course, we're with games like Call of Duty or whatever, the latest video games that are so wonderfully rendered. They're so cinematic. So I see this evolution being a few trends. It's one, the level of quality of rendering increasing to increase that immersion and realism. The other is that level of participation, interactive graphics, allowing us to embody characters and change the story with our own actions. And then also with the advent of the internet, the ability to share those experiences like with social media or connect with others socially within the video game world, like we're seeing now with Roblox or Fortnite, for example. Those are all of those things are coming together where games are also becoming more social. So this is the milieu in which we act, and I think all of it is headed towards a fundamental human need of being able to connect with one another and connect with these archetypal storylines that and gain that sense of meaning from our participation in the world. And media really reflects that life experience back to us.
Right. Yeah, completely. I completely double you because I think movies, music, can completely change the entire society. It's got the capability of doing that. So I am a musician myself, so I used to play for a rock band. How it's
Mm.
changed me as a person. So you spoke about how the lines are being blurred, the video games and content creation. At least what I'm seeing, these dynamics. There was this long form video content creating big story, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. At least here in India, we used to do these long form, and now because of social media, it's gone to shrunk to short form media. And you
Absolutely.
rightly pointed out, from just passive viewing experience, we've gone into an interactive, where the viewer itself is participating in the storytelling, with things like AR, VR, MR, and virtual production, and so on and so forth. Now this volumetric filmmaking, which you have coined, could you kind of like explain, what is it, and how do you kind of capture volume?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's another whole thread to get in there, which is about the granularization of storytelling and like the TikTok-ified experience. And
Would,
then,
would be great if you could do that.
yeah, well, let's establish what volumetric filmmaking is. And I think it's an interesting complement to talk about how there's sort of two themes happening. As in many parts of life, there's always a dichotomy emerging. To take the prompt of to define volumetric filmmaking. So again, this is a term that we coined, and it's important to distinguish volumetric filmmaking from volumetric video, which volumetric video is a generic content type. It's like a technology, the way that video is a technology. And the impetus behind defining a term volumetric filmmaking is very similar and analogous to why we have a concept of filmmaking that's distinct from video in a 2D world or in a traditional world, in that filmmaking really embodies the craft of storytelling with the medium. When you talk about a film, it really implies the cultural significance of an art, a piece of cinema and what it conveys. So the volumetric filmmaking extends that cinematic storytelling into the 3D interactive world. And it uses volumetric video as the means of communication. So this is all very McLuhanistic. The medium is the message, and so bear with us. Hopefully, the media theory nerds watching are enjoying this. So volumetric filmmaking is a way of making participatory stories in interactive 3D using reality as the canvas. So similar to filmmaking, we are capturing the real world, real people, real places that are conveying true events. And then we're bringing those into interactive 3D environments and allowing the viewer to experience that in an immersive and sometimes actually participatory way. So we have a catalog of volumetric films we've made at Scatter ourselves. You mentioned Clouds. That was the first one. That was really the invention of the medium. And we also build a tool called Depthkit, which is the world's most widely used tool for creating volumetric video, that fundamental content type I was mentioning. And that has in turn powered thousands of volumetric films made by our creative community broadly. So it's really a movement in the future of storytelling, is to be able to create participatory experiences with real people and real places as the subject.
Right. So over the years, we, as a traditional filmmaker, you use a single camera, and at times right now, we capturing stereoscopic content also, So or IMAX cams, but these are like single cameras, possibly twin cameras, and then with virtual reality, you have stereoscopic, monoscopic, you have possibly 8 camera rigs, 10 camera rigs, depending upon how you kind of have the rig, and then you capture the world. What's the process of volumetric capture? How do you capture volume?
Yeah, it's very complicated right now. And you mentioned the early days of cinema, black and white cameras, hand reels, cutting, editing by hand, developing film under a black room or like a dark room. That type of modality, that really craft-oriented, technical, early era of cinema is alive and well today in volumetric filmmaking. That's that level of like it or hate it, we are in the early innings of a new revolution in storytelling. And so just that kind of to set your expectation, I think our society of image-based culture, back to TikTok, we've gotten really used to just the alacrity and immediacy of our iPhone filmmaking. And that's allowing us to make content so quickly at such scale by so many people. It's so accessible. And at the same time, we have this new emerging craft and discipline that has in some ways gone back to those early days because of its level of technical complexity. It's so new. So I'll put you in that mindset. Imagine that you're Muybridge rigging up strings to a camera. Imagine that you're developing film by hand, building practical sets. And what volumetric filmmaking is, and how it's how it's performed, is there's different types of volumetric capture. So really, you have to separate your subject. So if you're capturing people, you use a tool like Depthkit for volumetric video. So that captures the human performance. In that case, we surround the subject in cameras, and we put the subject in the middle. They act out their experience. Maybe one or two people can act out together, and there's literally a box, like a volume, in that array, that anything that steps inside that space gets captured and turned into a 3D object or interactive moving figure. And then that object can then be put into a 3D engine like Unity or Unreal. And now recently the web has become a powerful 3D engine for playing back interactive 3D experiences through WebGL. And if you're capturing environment, you use a whole different set of tools. So this is not something that Depthkit does, but we play nicely with the world of 3D capture. Like there's tools called photogrammetry or LiDAR scanning, some of the same technology that's used for GIS, like global information systems, or autonomous vehicles. Cars, the technology being developed for cars is actually really useful for capturing 3D worlds and then also bringing them in to create the canvas or the setting of an interactive world. So really, we're in this mode of pastiche where we're capturing different 3D objects and amalgamating them into an interactive world, writing some scripting, and essentially making what is a video game in terms of the tooling. But the meaning of the production is much more in the cinematic realm, because everything that you're seeing in that world is from the real world. So it's like a live action film as opposed to the puppets and synthetic graphics that you're used to with video games.
Right. So James, what I hear from you, what you're saying is that you need multiple cameras to capture a volume. And there's a lot of post processing, because there's a humongous amount of data that you're capturing through these multiple cameras. It could be done with normal cameras. It could be done with depth sensing cameras. How do you make it accessible for, so that anybody and everybody can use it? Because, today you rightfully mentioned, that the entire storytelling has been upended. At one point in time, this was only for those, big production houses and stuff like that. But today, these content creators are using iPhones, they're using simple video editing softwares and kind of creating these 2D, fantastic, fascinating content. How does this get accessible? And maybe you could further elaborate on, what's the easiest way, because there are various companies around the world. Possibly they're looking at eight depth sensing cameras. There's people like Howley using maybe just one cams, two cams. Then there is AI which does perceptron through maybe just nerves, just capturing just the front part. How does this become accessible for anyone and everyone?
That's such a great question. And there's so many other areas of accessibility to touch on that aren't just the means of production, like how you capture. And I'd like to actually touch on all of them, because oftentimes people find themselves running into roadblocks down the road after they get started. And you hinted at a lot of the examples already within your question, which is great. I think before I jump into that, I think it could be helpful to ground this conversation in the purpose of doing this. So far we've been speaking in a very conceptual framework, and technical framework. Scatter, one of our core values is that art drives the innovation. So what helps guide us, kind of our guiding compass, is that whenever we're creating a tool or a technical process, that we're really grounded in the purpose of that, because that helps us ensure that we're moving towards something that will resonate with the world and not being a solution for solution's sake or tech for tech's sake. So back to some of the things that you referenced, I'd like to just quickly share some of our original stories and just touch on why they needed to use volumetric filmmaking as the medium where other mediums perhaps couldn't or wouldn't as powerfully have conveyed that story. And then I'll get into more of your questions around where we're going in the future, but I think it could be helpful to kind of ground this in some tangible stories. So starting at the beginning, you mentioned Clouds. So Clouds is an interactive documentary. It started production in 2010, and was published in 2015. And over that era, we saw a lot of change in the technological world. It was when the Oculus Rift was first introduced. And the Clouds told the story of a creative community of artists who work with code. So it was very much a documentary about a creative artist community. You can think of like Art21 set in cyberspace. And the theme of the documentary was how do networks like the internet power and change creativity. So all these artists created open source toolkits that allowed them to share how they made art using code. And it created this very globally distributed network, and this really new type of interactive work came out of it. And the film was actually created using one of those tools called Open Frameworks. And so in some ways we used the medium as the message and essentially created a video game that allowed the viewer to follow their curiosity through the story. So they could ask questions, and an artificial intelligence engine, we called the story engine, would generate a sequence of dialogue from the database of tens of hours of footage that we had captured and tagged, so that you would get this interactive story based on the viewer's curiosity. That was the fundamental power of that documentary, was that you could follow your own interest through this web of ideas. And it was all laid out spatially in 3D. So you're really flying through portals and seeing holograms of people in 3D. And that was the first time we used volumetric video to represent those artists as code-based figures. So in that way, like, we told the story of what it was like to work with code by portraying these artists literally occupying the headspace and the world of their creations. We also brought in interactive artworks that they had made. So that's, the power of volumetric filmmaking is really that form and content merger in that case. Similarly, 0 Days VR, which is the project that we won the Emmy for, initially was a documentary by Alex Gibney, Jigsaw Productions. We worked on the visual effects team to create an informant of that that was telling essentially government secrets as part of the documentary. And we then took and optioned that project into a video game or a VR experience. It was funded by Oculus. And we allowed the viewer in a VR headset to go into the world of cyber warfare. So this told the story of how the US and Israel created a cyber weapon called Stuxnet in 2010 that wreaked physical damage. It destroyed a nuclear plant in Iran and at Natanz. And in the experience in virtual reality, you actually occupy the perspective of the virus, and you're guided by the informant as a code-based digital figure that tells you the story of how it occurred. So again, another form and content merger where we could see how we could actually occupy the perspective of a virtual world using volumetric filmmaking. Another more recent story is not couched in the world of dreams and digital code. This is a project called Blackout. In Blackout, you actually occupy a subway passenger and walking through the subway in room scale virtual reality. So your headset on, and it's as if you're standing on a New York City train car. All of the passengers, you can actually stand next to them and hear their inner dialogue. It's a little bit like the opening to Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders. And in this interactive experience, you can actually choose how the story occurs just by where you stand and where you look, which again is one of these mergers of film and video games where you get a narrative story for each one of these people, but you're completely free to dip in and out of those streams of consciousness and learn about these different people's interesting lives. And each one of the people that we interviewed was telling the true story of themselves. So we found interesting cast of characters off the streets of New York. You think of like Humans of New York meet StoryCorps, and interviewed them and put their kind of like, they all had their own like 3-hour podcast essentially that was in their head, and you could dip in and dip out of that and meet people with surprising stories and where their appearance didn't necessarily convey what you might assume about them. So all of these stories, we have another one that has just been released that was also Emmy nominated, The Changing Same, about race in America and the history of racial injustice, that you can watch on Oculus TV. So these are our original stories, and they're our way of conveying the power of volumetric filmmaking. So a little bit of a deep dive there, but I think for folks who are looking for the purpose behind this, hopefully that is inspiring to see what stories can be told in this medium.
Right. I think it's such early days with this new medium of storytelling, and I'm sure in the next couple of years, possibly a decade or so, when this medium is more accessible for everyone, I think the medium itself will completely upend. Now, first, I want you to touch upon Depthkit, what it is, and when do you see like something like this being told and consumed by a larger audience? Everybody is interested and thinking about what could be the next step of storytelling, but everybody is cautious because everybody wants to play safe. What's field feature for storytelling and Depthkit?
Yeah, it's risky. So let's go back to that accessibility. So Depthkit, just to say exactly what it is it's a software solution. You can think of it similar to Adobe Creative Cloud. There's the tile of apps. You can imagine one of those being Depthkit. And it works in a similar way. You download the software onto your computer, you activate and log in with a license. Our customers are paying a subscription monthly or yearly. And having access to that software gives the user the ability to create volumetric video captures, these human performances that I was mentioning. It can also be called holograms, virtual holograms, so real 3D characters for interactive worlds. And what's unique about Depthkit is it actually interfaces with cameras. So we use between 6 and 10 3D sensors. They're called the Azure Connect. It's a successor to the Xbox Connect. And we encircle the subject in cameras, and you can then see yourself as a 3D hologram. In fact, I'm running it now if you want to see a quick demo. I don't know if the video, you use the videos in this, right? Yeah. Let me turn off the background blur, and I can actually show myself as a Depthkit powered hologram. Right. So, you're seeing me now as like in my room, and now I can switch over to a 3D form, and it's very similar to something you might be familiar with, like a Zoom background, except this has the power to actually allow me to spin around in full 3D. So I'm in this now virtual office that is like a more spacious office. And you can still see me talking and gesturing and making eye contact at low latency. And the world around me is created in a game engine like a video game. And in that case, I might as well be in a more spacious room, like upstate New York and a spring snowmelt, a little bit with a nice spring breeze coming through. So, this allows me to kind of teleport to different worlds and create a whole new experience just through Zoom right now, as an example. So how this is working is, this is using Depthkit. I have 5 cameras around me, and that allows me to then spoof cam, basically, that's coming out of a video game engine. So that's Depthkit. It really sits in this we think of it as like a Goldilocks principle, in that we are accessible enough while still producing professional quality output. There are 3D capture apps that you can use on your iPhone. And there's also, you can take a whole room, like a whole warehouse, and fill it full of 100 or more cameras and create volumetric video that way. So there's really, similar to any filmmaking technology, there's both ends of the accessibility spectrum. And we want to occupy that sweet spot of quality to accessibility.
Right. Awesome. You want to address that? When does, like, when do you see like a Hollywood, Bollywood film?
Yeah. Let's talk about that accessibility point, because, well, one thing is clear, like Hollywood is already using volumetric video, but it's using it in a very narrow way. For example, the I Want to Dance with Somebody, the Whitney Houston biopic that came out, all of the crowds, if you've seen the film, are created using volumetric video. They scanned people cheering individually, and they were able to create these crowds of thousands and thousands of people efficiently for the visual effects of that film. That was so much more affordable than actually filling a stadium full of extras or doing motion capture and 3D modeling, because volumetric video is essentially instantaneous. The way you're seeing me now and the Zoom call, it's like a video. You don't need to create a 3D avatar or a puppet or do motion capture. You're just instantly getting that authentic human model, and you can use that as a visual effects element. But when we're talking about volumetric filmmaking, we're bringing in that level of interactivity. We're talking about interactive software like video games, where you're experiencing the story. And so not only is that means of production challenging, like you're mentioning, there's a lot of new techniques to how to capture reality, especially in a high fidelity way. But as soon as you're making an interactive experience, you're really taking on, as a content producer, the publishing pipeline of a AAA video game studio. You can think of like EA or Ubisoft or Blizzard, in that you're really, where do you publish an interactive experience? Steam, or if you're an indie person, you put it on itch, or if you're making VR content, you put it on SideQuest. So that end-to-end distribution is very challenging. And then in addition, you have a whole different type of user experience for a story. We all play video games. We know that, we know it's kind of the idioms of like Fortnite with Battle Royale, or the games that you can create in Minecraft or Roblox. But these are really new types of stories. So when you're talking about the risk aversion of Bollywood or Hollywood, it comes down to like, where's the audience for this? How do people know about it? What's the discovery process? What's that publishing portal? There's no Netflix for interactive 3D volumetric films yet. And so I think across the board, you're seeing so many places of friction, and it's going to take, a generation really for the that consumer behavior to change, and for the folks who grew up playing video games to start to become interested in more diverse content, and also the technology to become more accessible, such that publishing is easier and higher quality.
Right. I'm sure there'll be more and more users if there's more awareness created around and accessibility. So more and more people realize, how content is evolving. Now, talk to me about this whole AI, generative AI hype, because
Yeah.
and I see that, even the content creation itself process is going to be upended, because I remember in 2015, I got into virtual reality, and, I got this stereoscopic rig, I shot a VR film, and I was really excited about it. And I was, wow, you could create virtual reality content. And today, I mean, you have these 3D engines, which kind of creates photorealistic content. And then now you have generative AI, which does text to speech, text to video, text to 3D, and the list goes on.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
The acceleration of technology is insane. How is all of this going to converge? And what do you think is the future of storytelling going to look like? Because I guess, storytelling needs to be accessible, without friction, and where everybody and anybody can do it. What you think is going to be the future of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, there's two questions there. It's like, how does generative AI play a role, and what disruption or advancement will that create, and then generally, what is the future? And so I'll start with generative AI, and I think that everyone's still processing this. These large language models and these diffusion models are like what you see with Midjourney, DALL-E, Stability.ai. Those really surprised, I think, even the research community, how quickly not only did they emerge technically, but then how they caught the public consciousness and became, household names. We're seeing a lot, looking at Runway ML, they just held the first AI film festival, right? This is so fascinating for me. And the way I'm processing this is, in some ways, they're the converse of what we're doing. It's very accessible, as in you just type in text, right? What could be more accessible than that? It's like a child can describe in words their imagination and see that come to life. And the results of that are surprising and unique, and definitely pulled from some kind of synthetic brain. It's some kind of, collective consciousness. You could think of these models that are trained on all this imagery. And in that way, it's antithetical to volumetric filmmaking, in that we're grounded in the reality and the authenticity of the actual thing that occurred. We're a camera input system. And I'm not saying one is better or the other. In fact, there's a lot of advantages to generative AI because of the accessibility you mentioned. But I do believe that we're still grappling with the value of that content in what it conveys. And I see a lot of people in the artistic community lashing out against generative AI, that it will commodify their craft and it will steal their jobs. And I think there will be some disruption there. However, in my definition of an artist, the artist is very different than the craft and the means of production. The artist is conveying the concept, is synthesizing from the world meaning and channeling that into a work of art or cinema or storytelling that really moves audiences. And I don't think just the ability to type in a prompt and create imagery very quickly is necessarily going to turn into an abundance of great art. I think new artists will be born that find a way to wield that craft in a way that really resonates with large audiences. And some tedious things that used to be very hand-driven will be disrupted, and more good artists and inspired artists will be able to make great work faster, which I think is just great for humanity. So I think there will be a new genre emerging, a new mode of production, a similar way that volumetric filmmaking was inspired by advances in 3D capture and new interfaces. We will have a new AI-driven cinematic world, and I can't wait to experience and play in that world and watch those films. I do also think that that's kind of thinking of AI as a purist medium in a similar fashion that we think of volumetric video and capture as a purist medium. There's a blending of the two in that with a single camera now using generative AI techniques, you can fill, as you mentioned, you can fill in the rest of the body, you can fill artifacts, you can transform the capture. So it, you start with me looking like a normal me, and then you can transform me into a Hulk or a dragon or something else. You can do like everyone's freaking out about the bold glamour Snapchat filter. Like you can do that in 3D, right? You can actually add value and layers and combine these two together you can move the medium forward using those techniques. So we're going to see everything sort of shift and adapt. Generally, things will become more accessible because AI automates processes that otherwise are done by manually or with hardware. So I anticipate a future where we can go down to single camera Depthkit capture and be able to achieve just almost equivalent results for far less work. And I'm happy for that. I don't like having to use a gajillion cameras. It's just the way that we can get at the ideas that we have now. So maybe cutting to the second part of your question, the future of storytelling, I don't think it is one thing. I think we're seeing polarization in different areas. So back to this sort of TikTokification of storytelling, a lot of that is driven by fast content production and attention economy, the business model behind the attention economy, which is sort of under threat right now, for better or worse, with Apple's ad blocking and that kind of thing. Where really, when someone creates a TikTok piece of content, it's not like that is the film. They're participating in a larger conversation, I think a larger cinematic experience, which is the remix culture and the call and response culture of TikTok. So I think that when I think of those films, it's actually more of the memes that are transported through that medium versus each individual piece of content. And that's actually a much larger, more interesting way to perceive that cinematic experience. It's actually like a collective UGC, user-generated film or cinematic experience that's the amalgamation of everyone who's participating in that thread. And the modality of that is very fast. You pull out your phone, you watch for 2 seconds, and then you get distracted and you're done. On the converse side of that, we're seeing immersive environments, virtual reality, augmented reality headsets, interactive location-based experiences. And in that case, we're seeing content where we actually desire to be not distracted and pulled in a million directions, but similar to cinema, we want to go into a world and have it occupy our entire experience and really come into something in a more immersive way than we ever have before. And those are almost like polar opposites in a sense. You have one large experience where you're getting deeper and deeper into a single story, like a video game, and experiencing it interactively. And the other, you're still participating in it, but it's just more bite-sized and fluid and on again, off again. So they're really balancing each other out. It's like cosmic forces here. So I don't see the future of storytelling being one single thing. It's just the evolution of these different polarities.
Right. What comes next for you? And if people want to reach out to you, where can they reach out?
Great question. So next for us is we're working on Depthkit. We're dramatically improving the quality of the pipeline without changing the hardware. We're also working really have some exciting developments in live streaming capability coming out. So if you want to broadcast yourself, similar to how you're seeing me now, and see someone in 3D at a distance, or do remote collaboration or music performances or live sports, that's something that we're in a great position for. So you can reach out to us by going to our website, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn, and just reach out directly. And Depthkit is a self-service software solution, so you can get started today through our website. And we have a free evaluation version that allows you to get started for no risk there. So excited to see what you make, and hopefully this will reach in your audience there, Eddie. Some new volumetric filmmakers will be inspired to give it a spin.
Thank you, James. Really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Yes, I guess, we all doing this bit to kind of, create awareness, because we are at a fantastic point of time. And I think content creators, studios, production house need to take a moment and understand that the entire content creation, distribution, monetization pipeline has been disrupted. And it's because of maybe how we have used it as a medium just to possibly, make money out of it, rather than create things which you connect with, the audience. I guess if through these kind of mediums, first of all, I think they need to understand that the new technology is the future, because through this, you will be able to, create storytelling where the user is the participant. It can
That's
be
right.
interactive, and I think all the production houses, studios need to leverage these technologies. And I think we need to kind of find ways where, I think you mentioned in the course of conversation, where it's largely maybe user generated content, where you leverage everybody's expertise, and everybody's is a storyteller. I don't even know what I'm saying, but I think it's the future of storytelling is looking very exciting. So appreciate you taking time and being part of
that's the
podcast.
through line. Maybe I think you hit the nail on the head there, is that we're talking about these polarities of the experience, like deep immersion into a single content experience, and the other, which is like this bite-sized experience. But across the board, both of those, the viewer, there's a collapsing of the content creator and the content consumer, right? And
Right.
In the immersive sense, you're a participant in the story. You create the story by participating, as opposed to passively watching. In that level of immersion, it's an embodied experience. And then in the sort of TikTok example, you're prompted to the story only exists as everybody's contributing to that through the remix or kind of response culture there. So maybe that is the future of storytelling, is that we're back to a world where everyone is a storyteller, and it's leveling the playing field. So I hope to see that.
Right. Thank you, James. Really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Eddie. Yep. Thanks for having me on.